Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Tenny, for the opportunity. Let me start this conversation with a question. Show of hands. How many people have heard the term, data is the new oil? Some people. I have an extraordinarily long commute from San Jose to San Francisco. And part of the time, I actually use to catch up on stuff. So I hear about a lot of this stuff. But what I wanted to do was to actually, when I was preparing for this, get a little bit of a fact base going, right? So I went on to LinkedIn, and I did a search on data. And it turned out there are over 2 million job postings. What was surprising to me was, though, the postings were actually all over the globe. So we hear a lot of hype. So obviously a lot of jobs. So how is it going on in the organizations? When executives are asked about how are data-driven initiatives going on, 77% of them say they foresee some kind of a challenge. So what's going on? There's a lot of demand. You hear it in the news. And something is off. Now, before I answer that question, I want to hit a quick rewind. And I want to go back to 2015. 2015, for me, was a really, really awesome year. I got this job at Google that I really, really wanted. And it was a job with a very simple mission. Delight your customers to drive customer success. Now, what this entailed was a very large multidisciplinary team of about 400 people, a revenue portfolio that was in the billions, 15 different offices. But since this word customer was there, I decided to do something very simple. I chose to talk to customers. And here I was in New York City with a meeting with one of the largest advertisers in the world. It was a great advertising agency. It was a conversation with the CEO. And I was in this amazing conference room with a spectacular view of Manhattan. You know, pleasantries were exchanged. The conversation started well. And then it seemed like I was in the courtroom of Judge Judy. For those who haven't seen the show, it is where she goes on people before they're even allowed to finish. Needless to say, this was probably one of the worst meetings of my life. I hung my head in shame, flew back to California. But there was a nagging question. Why did this actually happen? Now, it's, hindsight is 20/20, and I know something now that I did not know before. I believe at that point in time, I was served a heaping plate of watermelon metrics. These are those amazing metrics that we all review. They look green on the outside, but are absolutely red in the inside. Now, let me talk a little bit more and go through this process of unpacking that I did. Obviously, I did not want to go through one of these experiences again. So I had to ask what the hell was going on. And the first thing I realized, I started talking to people. Now, Google is known to be a very data-driven company, and I truly believe that. So I started to talk to people to understand what had gone wrong. Had we never heard of these problems before? And it turned out there's this very simple thing that happens, and it's called garbage in, garbage out. It's not like we didn't have the data. We actually had the data. The problem was the data existed in different silos, and we never bothered to actually connect it. Now, the second thing that happened was I started to talk to some more people. So, okay, great, some data problems, et cetera, et cetera. And I started running into some interesting conversations with what people started to tell me in terms of what they did and what their reality looked like. And quickly I figured out there were lots of games. And the games were there not because people were doing something bad, because the incentives or what people believed to be true and what was true for the business were completely misaligned. So as I've moved forward and I've faced the situation more and more, I ask these two simple questions. What does your day look like, and what does good look like for you? Extremely simple, extremely open-ended questions. But it's amazing the answers I get. Everything from I hear things like, oh, I use blah, blah, blah system. And then I ask myself, have you ever actually queried that system? Do you even know what exists in that systems? Turns out, most of the time, I find out there is some disconnect. The question, what good looks like, is an extremely interesting one. People talk about their own personal careers half the time. And the other half the time, they talk about how they want to get a promotion. Which is clearly, I completely get that. But then how do those incentives actually tie into the business that we are trying to look forward to? How does it translate to actual customer experience? I started this question talking about the data-driven organization and the disconnects. It's a very logical problem. Sounds like it should be a straight road. But what I have realized over and over again is this is truly a moment where all of us as leaders really need to think about how we are challenging the status quo. And the three things I believe that are needed. One, are we modeling the reality for our customers? Number two, are we actually modeling the reality of our businesses? And number three, are we modeling the reality of our people? And I think the reason it's a windy road is because one of these disconnects yield in that gap. So I'm going to leave you with one last word of advice. If you want to avoid being served a heaping plate of watermelon metrics, learn how to identify the garbage and understand why things may not be the way they seem, and conquer the games. Thank you.